Hi, everybody. We already have lots of people joining. I'm just going to give everybody a minute to make sure that we get everyone who registered in here in our event today. Okay, well, we have an hour, so let's get started. Well, a warm welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Alyssa Pacheco. I'm the communications director here at Alianza Americas, which also houses our digital organizing powerhouse, presente.org. I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping issues first. This will be an hour-long event. It will be recorded. We will send a copy of the recording to registrants shortly after we close. Our three featured speakers today are Ivan Espinosa Madrigal, Executive Director of Lawyers for Civil Rights, Miriam Albert, staff attorney at LCR, who's been working directly with the migrants in Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod. And we have Oscar Chacon, the co-founder and executive director of Alianza Americas. They're going to briefly give some context and analysis first, and then we'll be opening up for questions. We want to leave lots of time for the Q&A. Please drop your questions into the Zoom chat, and please only start doing so once the Q&A portion has officially started. I will be the moderator today, so I may be combining some of the questions to make sure that we cover as many bases as possible. We'll be sure to cover as much as we can. If you want to follow up afterwards, we'll be dropping my contact info into the chat here shortly. También me gusta mucho informarles que contamos con servicio de interpretación simultánea de inglés a español. Si van al icono del globo en la barra de navegación de Zoom, pueden seleccionar español y así escuchar la interpretación. English to Spanish interpretation is available. In your Zoom browser window, you can see a globe icon, which you can click and choose your preferred language. Here today is Alianza Americas. We are a coalition of 53 migrant-led organizations fighting for human rights and equity across 18 states. Also here with us is Lawyers for Civil Rights, an organization that provides free legal assistance to migrants. They've been on the ground in Martha's Vineyard since last week, responding heroically to the situation there after nearly 50 people, including women and children, were left stranded as a result of a fraudulent and discriminatory scheme. In response to this fraud, yesterday, Lawyers for Civil Rights filed a federal civil rights class action lawsuit against Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Department of Transportation Secretary Jared Perdue, the state of Florida, and their accomplices. The lawsuit is filed on behalf of a class of affected immigrants, including the people stranded in Martha's Vineyard and Alianza Americas. The immigrants who are plaintiffs in the lawsuit, they've been receiving death threats, and we want to keep them safe. We're also mindful of the implications that all this may have for their families back in their countries of origin. That is why Lawyers for Civil Rights and Alianza are going to be the primary spokespeople today on this call. So let's hear first from Miriam Albert, a staff attorney with LCR, and she's going to give us some context on what Lawyers for Civil Rights has seen and heard on the ground this past week. Miriam, take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miriam Albert, and I am a staff attorney at Lawyers for Civil Rights, an organization in Boston that provides free legal services to low-income people. Since Wednesday night of last week, Lawyers for Civil Rights has been in rapid response mode, addressing the unfolding humanitarian events surrounding the unlawful relocation of immigrants through fraudulent means. For nearly a week now, Lawyers for Civil Rights has been working with approximately 50 immigrants who were deceived by conspirators, perpetrating a fraudulent scheme and using them as political props. Governor DeSantis of Florida has taken credit and public responsibility for the Martha Vineyard political stunt, preying on destitute immigrants, including women and children. DeSantis and other scheme organizers induced our clients to travel with promises of employment, housing, and immigration assistance. This scheme placed our clients in harm's way. Lawyers for Civil Rights and a team of pro bono attorneys and community volunteers have been working around the clock to support the migrants, first in Martha's Vineyard and now in Cape Cod. I personally arrived in Martha's Vineyard on Thursday morning as the humanitarian situation unfolded, and I helped coordinate free legal assistance. I was on the ground with a dozen of volunteers coordinating a robust community response to feed, shelter, and protect the migrants. On Friday, Lawyers for Civil Rights escorted the migrants off the island to a base in Cape Cod, where they are now safely housed. This was done to connect them to readily available resources, which were challenging to coordinate on an island that is geographically isolated and remote. The island is accessible only by plane or boat, and these modes of transport were often fully booked. The logistical issues made the mobilization of pro bono attorneys, case managers, and other volunteers more difficult. In Cape Cod, they are now fully connected to all the services they need, including a steady stream of volunteer immigration attorneys. Our clients are sharing alarming and chilling stories. They have survived harrowing experiences, not just in their journey to the United States, but also with the fraudulent relocation scheme. We are talking about a man who was tortured and rendered toothless. While kidnapped, his teeth were pulled with pliers. We are talking about children who arrived on the island in need of medical attention. The perpetrators abandoned them without shelter, food, resources, or support on Martha's Vineyard. It is amazing that the Martha Vineyard community mobilized overnight to support and protect the migrants despite receiving zero notice. And Lawyers for Civil Rights did not ask for this fight. Along with our clients, we were thrust into this by the defendants, including Governor DeSantis, who deliberately and intentionally elected to relocate migrants by fraudulent inducement to Massachusetts. Once the migrants were in our own backyard, it became our legal and moral responsibility to protect them and to hold perpetrators accountable for the injustice our clients have experienced. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian, for sharing that with us. Here to give some more big picture context on the legal components of the case and the need for accountability is Ivan Espinosa Madrigal, Executive Director of LCR.
Good morning. My name is Ivan Espinosa Madrigal. I am the Executive Director of Lawyers for Civil Rights. As my colleague Miriam just indicated, Lawyers for Civil Rights provides free legal support to low-income people in Massachusetts. We became involved in this matter as soon as the humanitarian situation unfolded in the Vineyard, and we have been underground since day one, helping with the coordination of community responses and also helping with the coordination of free legal assistance for immigrants that need support in their immigration cases. Yesterday, Lawyers for Civil Rights filed a class action in federal court in Boston on behalf of the migrants deposited unceremoniously in Martha's Vineyard. This is the first case of its kind nationally. Since Lawyers for Civil Rights filed this case as a class action, we represent not only the stranded migrants in the Vineyard, but all similarly situated migrants across the country who have been fraudulently induced by Governor DeSantis in Florida to cross state lines through misrepresentations. And we are seeking a nationwide injunction to block Governor DeSantis in Florida from engaging in these activities which endanger human lives, including women and children. In terms of the mechanics of the complaint, we are filing a series of constitutional and other claims against the defendants. This includes illegal seizure, false arrest, deprivation of liberty, and discrimination claims under 14th Amendment equal protection principles. We also have a federal preemption claim, which we are raising because the defendants specifically intervened in the orderly administration of federal immigration law by choosing to target immigrants who had surrendered themselves to federal officials, who had been screened and processed by federal officials, who had received humanitarian parole and other forms of immigration statuses from federal officials, and who were under federal management with supervision appointments, ICE check-ins, and hearings already scheduled. All of this indicates a deliberate and intentional interference in ongoing immigration matters to sabotage and derail our clients from complying with federal immigration law, to sabotage and derail the orderly operation of the federal immigration system. We are also seeking damages for our clients for the harrowing experiences that they have survived through this fraudulent scheme perpetrated by Governor DeSantis, the state of Florida, and their conspirators. With respect to the status of the case, we filed a motion to proceed anonymously because our clients have received a barrage of hate messages. Our clients continue to receive hate messages and death threats that are arriving in the Office of Lawyers for Civil Rights, that have arrived at Alianza Americas, our organizational plaintiff in this case. And we have requested the court's protection so that our client's identity can be held confidential to protect them and their loved ones here and in Venezuela as the matter unfolds. Early this morning, the federal court in Boston granted the motion to proceed anonymously, scoring the first victory for migrants who have experienced human rights violations at the hands of Governor DeSantis, the state of Florida, and other perpetrators. We will continue to robustly litigate this matter to secure injunctive relief against the people responsible for this injustice. As part of this case, we are proud to represent not only the immigrants, but also Alianza Americas. Alianza Americas has been doing tremendous work providing technical and other humanitarian assistance through its vast network of organizations nationally, including groups that are receiving immigrants in states being targeted by the defendants and by other shameless actors. It is critical to have them integrated into the case to not only receive a remedy for the folks stranded in the Vineyard, but also for all other immigrants who are similarly situated and that have had to be supported by Alianza Americas and its network of organizations on the ground. I will now turn it to our incredible ally and partner, Oscar Chacon at Alianza Americas, to explain more about the role of Alianza Americas and its leadership in championing this case.
Well, thank you very much, Ivan, for those kind words. As it's been said, I'm the executive director of Alianza Americas, an 18-year-old network of Latin American, Caribbean, immigrant-led organizations in the US. And of course, we are, most of all heartbroken. For what's been happening in the past several months, really heartbroken to see the way in which the pain of people is manipulated and used for political purposes. Alianza Americas has been actually very busy with this subject matter from the beginning. Buses arriving to DC without anybody knowing they were arriving. Our members there, have been extremely busy trying to respond in the best way possible. We've seen this same pattern repeat in New York City, in Chicago, and more recently in Massachusetts. We are happy to be partnering with Lawyers for Civil Rights and the individual defendants that represent the class of people that we are talking about. I think it's important for us to understand why are people coming, because this question keeps coming up. And people are coming essentially for two primary reasons in the recent past. The first reason is the fact that life in the countries of origin of many of the nationals that have been trying to reach the US have become much more difficult, at least on two counts. One, there is an increasing pattern of dictatorial, authoritarian governing practices in these countries. And that combines, with the fact that we are not at all recovered from the impact of COVID-19, a global event that made the life of so many people in Latin America so much worse, because life was not nice even before COVID, and COVID only made it worse. So the combination of these elements, without bringing about others that are also important, alone explain why we have seen increasing numbers of people from throughout the Western Hemisphere and the Caribbean coming to the US. And they are coming in the only way that's available to them. That is to travel and to reach the US border, and upon arrival at the US border, apply for asylum, which is a remedy available to them. And none of this is illegal. None of this is out of what is normally expected for people to do in similar situations. I want to highlight the fact that people undergo lots of pain, lots of trauma, suffering in their route to try to make it to the US border, in the hope that they will find support, they will find relief, to their pain. And it's sad to see that there are politicians in our country that have no hesitation whatsoever in actually duping people, manipulating people, tricking people, which only compounds the difficulties that people have already experienced in their way to the US. I think it is important to highlight the fact that this set of events have also brought again to the forefront the need for us to have a conversation about how can we do better? How can immigrant integration, including those who are seeking asylum in the US, how can we do it better? Especially knowing that these individuals have been so incredibly positive for the well-being of the United States of America for decades, and also the well-being of millions of households in their home countries who receive, among other things, remittances, financial support from their relatives working in the US. Sadly, we don't have policies that actually allow us to make the best possible management of these events. We have policies that are incredibly obsolete, profoundly inhumane, very wrongly oriented, and all those need to change. But the bottom line here is that these events bring us the opportunity to have these conversations anew, but having those conversations should not distract us from the fact that there are, again, politicians that are unscrupulous, that are cynical, and that have no hesitation in as far as using the pain of human beings, families, men, women, children, to advance, very cheap political goals that they have. I want to also highlight the fact that the reason we joined this case is not only because of the people arriving to Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. We agreed to be part of this, and we're happy to be part of this because we see this as a national pattern. And I think any immigrant who has been duped to board a bus, to board a plane, should feel themselves identified with this particular case, because this case is indeed about the abuses that have been committed against immigrants who deserve, again, protection and support, but are getting something else. Finally, I think it's important to highlight the fact that having allies like the Lawyers for Civil Rights in Massachusetts makes an incredible difference. So many people have no clue that there is indeed options using precisely the US legal system to try to remedy the type of abuses that are being committed. We believe that what has been done, not only against the immigrants who arrived in Martha's Vineyard is absolutely morally reprehensible. It's horrible. It's an abuse of people's dignity and rights, but it is also illegal. And that's exactly why we are proudly a part of this lawsuit, and we'll do the best we can to indeed get to the goals that Ivan well outlined in his comments. So I'd like to end it there. Thank you very much, and I'll pass it on to Elisa.
Thanks so much, Oscar, for that information and commentary. We're going to open things up now for the Q&A. So please start dropping your questions into the Q&A Zoom chat. If I start seeing common themes, I may combine some of the questions. If you want a specific panelist to answer a question in Spanish or first in English and then Spanish, please ask. And however, we won't be able to provide bilingual answers to all the questions. To start with, Ivan, do you think you could give a brief explanation in Spanish for our Hispanic media journalists who've joined us here? Una breve explicación del caso en español y por qué estamos haciendo la demanda.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. And before I do that, I also want to address something that will inevitably be in the Q&A, which is the consent forms, which the state of Florida made available to reporters after the lawsuit was filed. The consent forms themselves are further evidence against the defendants. They clearly show the material information about how the relocation would occur, where they would go, was not included in the form, especially in the Spanish translation portion of the form. The form was not fully translated. It was missing material information that would have been needed for our clients to make an informed decision and to provide consent. And so I want to address that head on at this time in anticipation of questions. Now, I'm happy to do a brief summary of the lawsuit in Spanish for folks, and then we could launch into the Q&A. Nosotros en la organización Abogados por los Derechos Civiles, en colaboración con Alianza Américas, una red de organizaciones que apoyan a la comunidad inmigrante y la comunidad latina, y junto con los inmigrantes que fueron depositados en la isla de Martha's Vineyard, hemos entablado una demanda colectiva en la Corte Federal en Boston. Esta demanda busca una medida cautelar, un amparo para parar la reubicación, la expulsión de inmigrantes bajo condiciones de fraude, bajo condiciones de mentira, de decepción, por medio de los demandantes, que son el gobernador DeSantis del estado de Florida, junto con el estado de Florida y otras entidades que son responsables por la trampa que se desenvolvió con los 50 aproximadamente inmigrantes en la isla de Martha's Vineyard. Esta demanda está en su comienzo, pero justamente esta mañana la Corte Federal en Boston otorgó un fallo a favor de nuestros clientes, de los inmigrantes y de Alianza América, diciendo que el caso puede proceder anónimamente, con confidencialidad, para que la identidad de nuestros clientes no se tenga que revelar en este momento, específicamente porque ellos han estado recibiendo muchas amenazas y mensajes de odio, que también han sido dirigidas al equipo legal de los Abogados por los Derechos Civiles y también a la organización de redes de grupos comunitarios Alianza Américas. Entonces nosotros vamos a seguir trabajando en esta demanda para ganar un fallo, ¿no? Una solución permanente para que los inmigrantes no puedan ser transportados por medio de fraude a través del país de la manera que lo estamos viendo con el gobernador DeSantis y el estado de Florida. Y como parte de la demanda representamos, como mencioné, no solo a los inmigrantes afectados en Massachusetts, pero también a cualquier otro inmigrante a quien ya le ha sucedido o a los que están vulnerables a que les pueda ocurrir este tipo de campaña de decepción, de fraude, para tratar de expulsarlos y moverlos a través del país. Entonces, la demanda colectiva incluye muchas personas afectadas, más allá de los que están aquí en Massachusetts, y vamos a trabajar en forma muy cercana con Alianza Américas para asegurar que los derechos de nuestros clientes sean respetados y que la dignidad de nuestros clientes sea lo que aquí se mantenga en alto a través del sistema jurídico. Como los clientes dicen, llegaron a este país huyendo, porque este es un país de leyes y lo que les ocurrió es una violación de sus derechos constitucionales, y no se le debería hacer a nadie.
Thanks for that, Yvonne. So we have a couple of questions here so far about, do we have any information from the other plaintiffs so far, or that we've gathered in the case, about how specific people were recruited to be lured onto these buses and these planes? There was a commonality that many of them were of Venezuelan origin. Do we have a sense yet of how they were approached when, you know, the defendants reviewed the immigration paperwork? Like, what were they looking for? How do we know how certain people were recruited into this fraud?
We do not have some of the information about the perpetrators, which is why we have identified them as DOE defendants. We will, in the process of litigation and through discovery, ascertain the identity of those individuals. And so more on that as the case proceeds. Now, with respect to the national origin of our clients and the race of our clients, which is highly relevant for the equal protection discrimination claims that have been raised in the complaint, we believe at this time that the migrants sent to Massachusetts through a fraudulent scheme were deliberately targeted. They, for example, were asked to provide photographs of their immigration documents to see if they were eligible to be transported. So clear intentionality around looking into what is the immigration status of these migrants. And then if they fit the profile that they were looking for, relocating them through fraudulent inducement. And so through what we are already seeing, and this is just in a matter of days of interviewing clients, this was a deliberate attempt, which is why the Venezuelan nationality appears to be predominant among the group in Massachusetts. And again, this bolsters our argument that there was a deliberate interference with federal immigration law, because they were asking the affected individuals to show their papers. So clearly inquiring about their immigration status, reviewing their immigration paperwork, and many times even purporting to advise them on what next steps would be, including, don't worry about your immigration proceedings. It will be handled in Massachusetts. You will receive immigration assistance. You will receive immigration support in Massachusetts. This shows a deliberate effort to usurp the federal government's exclusive authority over immigration.
Thanks for that, Ivan. Oscar, we've also been getting some questions about, this is something that's been the transportation of migrants has been ongoing for months in Texas and Arizona. Could you speak a little bit about why this particular event was, really stood out, and sort of the trends that we're seeing in general with this ongoing political stunts that we've been seeing?
Well, first of all, I think that that's probably a question that both Miriam and Ivan can probably answer even better than I can, but let me just point out that clearly the event of the plane getting into Martha's Vineyard, with people truly being tricked as to where were they going. Nobody really knew where exactly they were going to until they were in midair, which is in itself a problem. I think presented an opportunity of a condensed, if you want, case of abuse that could be documented. And I think that that's what made these particular cases stands out compared to the number of buses that have arrived in Washington, D.C., New York City, Chicago in particular. And so, as I said, I believe Miriam or Ivan can add more to that question in terms of why did this case really stand out in ways others don't. And I think it is also important to take advantage of your asking me about it, Elisa, to point out that, interestingly, the majority of people who arrive at the US border and who wish to apply for humanitarian protection in the US are not necessarily from Venezuela. The majority of them are actually from Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, except that we don't even allow them, to file for asylum because we deport them immediately using mechanisms such as Title 42, which remains in place until today. And that is a different story, not the subject matter of this particular press event. But I think it's important to keep in mind that we have a long way to go in as far as really making the US a place where people like these Venezuelans who deserve protection, support, can actually find it. But the issue is actually much bigger than just the case that we are dealing with here.
I think one point that I want to make on that is, and my colleague Miriam made this point, we did not look for this fight. We were thrust into this by Governor DeSantis and the state of Florida. It is our legal and moral responsibility to act. Lawyers for Civil Rights provides free legal support to low-income people in Massachusetts. We saw this unfold in our own backyard. We've been on the ground helping to coordinate legal assistance and the community response. It was through the course of our direct work with affected individuals. My colleague Miriam has been on the ground in Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod since the humanitarian event unfolded. It was through the course of our conversations with clients that we realized the extent of the gravity here, the extent of the fraud, the extent of the constitutional violations, and we took immediate action to remedy that. We understand that there are other people affected, which is why this was filed as a class action to stop DeSantis in Florida from doing this via plane or bus in terms of tricking people, deceiving people, lying to people about where they're going and what they will receive at the other end. That has got to stop. Now, as for the broader immigration challenges that are being raised in the Q&A, we stand ready to provide technical assistance to lawyers in other states who would like to hold those states accountable, those actors accountable. And we will be reaching out to other legal organizations across the country to make sure that they have the information that we have been able to develop and the legal theories that we have developed so that they can implement similar cases in response to the busing crisis, in response to exactly the type of fraud that we have seen here in Massachusetts. We jumped into action in Massachusetts because this came to us, and we stand ready now to protect the people in Massachusetts and anyone else in the country affected by DeSantis and Florida. And we will help other attorneys who are dealing with the crisis in other states.
Thanks for that, Ivan. Marian, we've also been getting some questions that are basically about what are going to happen to the clients, the plaintiffs now. How will they be processed with their asylum claims? Will that likely happen in Massachusetts? Do they have family or friends here? Are there some who are looking to arrive to different final destinations, Florida, elsewhere in the country? And also, could you elaborate a bit on the harm that's been done to them, the risks, the threats that they've been receiving?
Sure. I mean, things are rapidly developing with our clients, and I've been on the ground, like Ivanta and I said, since Thursday, and things are quickly changing. But our clients have experienced, so much emotional trauma because of this experience. They were deceived, they're angered, they feel tricked, and they're still like processing that, and being the fact that they've been relocated not, multiple times, and dealing with all of that at the same time has been, I think, a lot for them to process, and something that they continue to do. So most of our clients, we've been in coordination with the pro bono attorneys on the ground and volunteers to ensure that they did connect with an immigration attorney to take on their case from this point forward. So that will continue to develop individually.
Thanks for that, Miriam. We've also been getting some questions about, Yvonne, whether you can go into like a bit more detail about the evidence so far that shows just the degree of official state involvement in perpetrating this scheme. Has there been any evidence so far showing involvement from DHS? What have we seen so far that's sort of tying this, what we've been seeing so far with DeSantis, the governor's office, and with other state officials? Could you talk a little bit about the evidence that's come forward?
So to be clear, this is a civil case. At Lawyers for Civil Rights, we are pursuing civil remedies. So we have no involvement in any other type of investigation. Like, we are focused on the civil remedies, the civil claims here. And that's what's most important for us, because we're talking about constitutional violations. We're talking about the endangerment of people, the fraudulent inducement and misrepresentations made by defendants to push these immigrants into planes, to push these immigrants into Martha's Vineyard, when none of this had been clear to them. And so the civil remedies here are going to be key. That is what we're focusing on, and that will be what we continue to focus on as we move forward. And so you would have to ask other authorities that are leading other efforts about the specific efforts that they may or may not be leading. We can't speak to that. We are exclusively focused on the constitutional and civil rights claims that we have presented in federal court on behalf of Alianza Americas and the class. And as my colleague just explained, we are also on a parallel track, making sure that each of these individuals has an immigration attorney assigned to them so that they can go through the remaining elements of the federal immigration process. Any hearings, any check-ins, any supervised visits, all of that needs to be addressed. We need to stabilize the clients. And so the pro bono legal aspect is very important for individual cases, but we're also interested in the broader structural and systemic pieces, which is why the class action was filed.
Thanks for that, Yvonne. We've also gotten a couple of questions about sort of what's likely to happen on the horizon. There's unnamed defendants in the case, Elias Perla, Emmanuel. Has any new information about them come forward? How is that information likely to come forward? Can you speak a little bit about sort of like, how do you see this sort of like evolving and like next steps in gathering evidence and information in the case moving forward?
So we are still gathering information. As we gather additional details, we will update the complaint, for example, to include the real identities of people like Perla. And so that is an ongoing process. as we continue to litigate in federal court, we will have more access to discovery, and we look forward to being able to share more when we have additional details available.
Thanks for that, Ivan. Oscar, we also have a question here in Spanish. Además de acciones legales, ¿hay algo más que Alianza Américas puede hacer para proteger a los inmigrantes y evitar que caigan en esas trampas políticas? ¿Puedes hablar un poco en español sobre cómo el trabajo de Alianza y nosotros qué estamos haciendo con nuestras redes, nuestras comunidades?
Claro, con mucho gusto. De hecho, me da la oportunidad de resaltar una característica prácticamente única de Alianza Américas como una red nacional de organizaciones en Estados Unidos. No solamente nosotros representamos la perspectiva de las comunidades a lo largo y ancho del país, comunidades inmigrantes latinoamericanas y caribeñas, sino que también desde que nacimos, en el 2004, hemos incorporado el elemento país de origen, que es un elemento que generalmente está ausente en la vasta mayoría de organizaciones que trabajan con personas migrantes, que hacen trabajo de incidencia política en cuanto a política de inmigración se trata. Y creemos nosotros que es una grave falta, ¿verdad? Porque no entender qué pasa fuera de Estados Unidos, qué pasa, qué hace que la gente se vea forzada a tener que salir huyendo de sus países, es una falta grave, ¿verdad? Y Iván lo ha dicho a veces en otros contextos, es prácticamente un acto de negligencia, ¿verdad? No conocer el contexto de los países para poder hacer una buena labor de defensa aquí. En este sentido, lo que Alianza Américas hace es trabajar muy de cerca con aliados en México, en países centroamericanos y rápidamente también expandiéndonos hacia el sur del continente, el Caribe, por supuesto, y tenemos también relaciones muy cercanas con aliados en el ámbito mundial. Y lo que hacemos es tratar de proveer información que consideramos va a ser valiosa para que estas organizaciones puedan hacer un trabajo de educación pública en aras de que puedan al menos tener una idea elemental, ¿verdad? De qué es lo que van a encontrar en la ruta migratoria, qué es lo que van a encontrar en Estados Unidos. Desdichadamente, hay muchísima gente en América Latina que tiene una idea bien romántica acerca de Estados Unidos. Ellos creen en el dicho, pues, que tanto promovemos, que somos la tierra de las oportunidades, ¿verdad? Que somos un país que le va a abrir los brazos a personas que andan buscando una vida mejor, entre comillas, el sueño americano, pero muy poca gente se da cuenta de que eso no necesariamente quiere decir que la gente va a poder encontrar el tipo de apoyo y protección que necesitan cuando han salido desesperados de sus países. Y esa es una labor donde obviamente los gobiernos también tienen un papel muy grande que jugar y lamentablemente hasta ahora los papeles que han jugado no han sido los mejores y la mejor evidencia de eso es que todavía hay muchísima gente. De hecho, creo que no es sorpresa señalar que el año fiscal que justamente termina el 30 de este mes va a pasar a la historia como el año en que más personas intentaron ingresar de forma no autorizada a través de la frontera sur de los Estados Unidos. Esto nos dice mucho del fracaso que hemos tenido tratando de crear las condiciones económicas, sociales, políticas, culturales que hagan que la gente quiera quedarse. En estos sentidos, Alianza también busca ser un aliado, ¿verdad? Trabajando con organizaciones de sociedad civil, de vez en cuando con gobiernos también, en América Latina, para tratar de llegar pues a una realidad donde la gente verdaderamente quiera quedarse en su país y no verse forzada a tener que venir a buscar vida mejor en territorios extranjeros.
Thanks for that, Oscar. Miriam, we've also gotten, more questions going back about what's going to happen next to the people who were affected by this. Do we have a sense of where they're headed, or where are they now? Are they in shelters with their relatives on the base in Cape Cod? Have the majority of them applied for asylum? Sort of like what's next for the people involved in this case, or do you have a sense of that?
Sure. The group of migrants continues to be housed at Joint Base in Cape Cod. And as we mentioned earlier, we continue to coordinate services both to the whole group there for whatever needs they might have. And things continue to develop, so I can't say for certain where every single individual will be placed, but those efforts are definitely underway. And a lot the same with the question about immigration proceedings. You know, individuals have a variety of claims available to them. Some of them asylum, they have other available immigration relief available to them as well, and that's something that they're taking on with their individual immigration attorneys.
Thanks, Marian. Yvonne, we're also getting a couple of questions just about sort of logistically, what might happen next in the lawsuit. Could this lawsuit affect other attempts to move migrants? Do we have any idea how quickly we might get a hearing on an injunction to stop Florida's efforts? You know, Governor DeSantis is making certain arguments, and, you know, do they have a chance of flying in federal court? Could you speak a little bit about sort of what you see sort of like the next steps for the lawsuit and what implications it might have nationally?
This is the first lawsuit of its kind in the country. We are dealing with an unprecedented situation. Never before have immigrants been endangered in this way. If the Martha's Vineyard community wouldn't have acted so quickly and embraced them and protect them, things could have turned out very differently. And we're talking about a group of highly vulnerable immigrants, people who were lured with $10 McDonald's cards, people who were lured by the offer of free shoes. In this state of intense vulnerability, it is really despicable that our clients have been fraudulently induced, and to underscore, for political gain. And it is important to be able to vindicate their rights. They've been stripped of their dignity. They've been stripped of their lawful protections by defendants. And so our hope is that we can showcase what a robust community and legal response looks like to maintain the rule of law, to fight against discrimination, and to ensure that our clients have a day in court for the fraud that has been perpetrated against them. Alianza Americas has been critical on the ground in supporting the humanitarian aspects of this crisis in states across the country. It is shameful that they've had to divert resources to do this. It is shameful that organizations like Lawyers for Civil Rights have had to drop everything that we have traditionally done to be on the ground in response to this manufactured crisis. We will hold the perpetrators accountable, and we will provide technical assistance to lawyers in other states who want to pursue similar action against these conspirators.
Thanks so much for that, Yvonne. We've also been receiving a couple of questions just about the shocking documents that have been involved in this case, where people were giving brochures that we believe were extremely misleading. Can we explain a little bit more about why we believe the brochures were misleading? Just sort of what are the type of documents that we've been seeing people receiving? Consent forms? Did everyone sign them? Can you talk a little bit about sort of like the brochures and the documentation that we've seen in the case? Y si es posible dar como una breve explicación en español también.
The brochure was an official looking document that was put together by defendants, placed in shiny red folders and handed out to the migrants, almost like a informational or welcome package, compiling details that are not appropriate for immigrants like them who have not been adjudicated specifically as refugees. The majority of our clients have humanitarian parole, so they're not eligible for many of the services and benefits that were outlined in the brochure. And this is, again, part of the deception, part of the fraud, very much part of luring our clients with misrepresentation, telling them that they would have access to services that they're not eligible for. It's not unlike the consent forms. All of this is evidence in furtherance of the conspiracy. The consent form was not properly translated, was not completely translated. It left a material information out, which made it impossible for our clients to provide informed consent. This is all part and parcel of the fraudulent scheme that we are challenging in court. En breve, en español, nosotros estamos todavía recopilando evidencia y documentación como parte del caso. Esto incluye documentos, panfletos que fueron preparados por las personas que estaban cometiendo el fraude. Y en esos panfletos tenían información, por ejemplo, de beneficios que refugiados pueden recibir en el estado de Massachusetts. Pero el problema es que nuestros clientes no son refugiados, no técnicamente, porque lo que tienen es una especie de protección migratoria llamada parol humanitario. Y por medio de ese estatus, ellos no son elegibles para los beneficios que estaban en el panfleto. Y este panfleto, entonces, es en realidad prueba de la decepción, del fraude, porque esto fue lo que se les dio, diciéndoles montes en el avión y van a tener acceso a estos servicios, pero no son elegibles. Y también esto es similar como los formularios de consentimiento que supuestamente el estado de Florida aseguró. Estos documentos no están bien traducidos, no están traducidos completamente, tienen detalles críticos que están ausentes, y esto significa que nuestros clientes no podían tomar una decisión, ¿no? Dar consentimiento sin saber estos detalles. Entonces, el panfleto, los documentos de consentimiento, supuestamente, todo esto es evidencia a favor de los argumentos que estamos presentando de fraude en la Corte Federal.
Thank you for that, Ivan. We've also gotten some questions. I'm not sure if LCR manages this. Do you have any sense of the COVID funding in Florida, the federal funding that might be involved with this? How was COVID funds appropriated, like in the relocation program? I think that might be a little bit out of our wheelhouse, but we have gotten a couple of questions about that.
We will continue to share more information as we proceed with the litigation, and particularly through discovery.
Thanks. We've also gotten some questions about, what were the conditions that the plaintiffs were in before they were approached by Alias Perla and others. Where were they held housed? Were they able to sort of move about on their own? Sort of what was the timeline of the situation that they faced before they were moved to Martha's Vineyard?
Miriam, do you want to tackle that question?
Several of our clients had been, going through various churches and shelters before being approached by DOE defendants, Perla and Emmanuel. So that's kind of what their situation was like right before being approached by Perla. And from what the information that our clients have shared, they were transported to a hotel where they all stayed at a very number of days until the two planes were ready to be boarded.
Thanks for that. So
Lisa?
we're close.
Just give me a
Yes.
sec to actually add to this question, because I think it's also very important for the public, for journalists to understand what makes these particular recent arrivals from Venezuela, different than other groups that have come over the years. And one important difference is the lack of existing social, familial networks that actually allow for people to be better self-supported. And that's an important element to highlight because, there are other groups of immigrants who arrive in the US. Not everybody who arrived in the US necessarily end up in detention and has to apply for asylum. A lot of people just don't experience that. But the reason they manage to integrate more easily and find support from their own relatives and friends is because of the existing networks. That is, as I said, a characteristic that sets these recently arrivals from Venezuela in particular different. And I also wanted to make sure that people understand that, as I said before, this is an opportunity, for us to also revisit the conversation on, are we prepared, as a society to actually honor our promises of being a country that welcomes immigrants? And I think that conversation, as a result of this particular set of incidents in Massachusetts, but also elsewhere in the country where buses have been arriving in the past few months, is beginning to actually take place. And as Alianza Americas, we are committed to doing everything we can to try to help orient the conversation in a direction that end up ultimately equipping us, with better policies, better approaches to questions of immigrant integration, especially people who are requesting asylum in the US.
Thanks for that, Oscar. So we've got 3 minutes left. So just to close out things here, Oscar, I was wondering if you could offer some final thoughts. We've been seeing this political stunt ongoing for months now. It's aimed at pushing an anti-immigrant agenda, infusing fear and hate in receiving cities. And really, you could argue that this is happening because whether it's DeSantis in Florida or Abbott in Texas, this is happening because they don't have viable solutions for the challenges that we're facing. Could you speak a little bit about, our big picture recommendations for what are some viable solutions for us to be welcoming communities and to be meeting these challenges?
Well, it is important to remind all of us, that we are in the middle of an electoral campaign in the US. Sadly, that is part of what's going on. And I think that the challenge ultimately, and I was beginning to tackle this in my previous, comments, the ultimate challenge is how can we really evolve from where we are today, namely a nation that has an immigration policy altogether that is super old, super obsolete, very much inhumane, very impractical in as far as really reconciling the different realities that characterize, the world we live in. I find it very ironic that as of the end of August, there were at least 8 million jobs vacant in the US, all throughout the country. And here we are trying to make the life of people impossible, who are hoping to come to the US and continue to do what they have done for decades, which is to help the nation progress, help the nation become better, generate incredible wealth. How it is distributed is a different conversation, but immigrants have actually been extremely invaluable in as far as wealth generation in the US. So clearly, we need not only a brand new set of immigration policies that can actually help us do better as a nation, and as part of that, really modernize our humanitarian protection laws as well. Most people don't even know that the essential architecture of humanitarian protection dates back to 1951. That is essentially the architecture of the law that is still in place. We need to absolutely modernize those components of immigration law. And ultimately, we need to also find every way we can to inject new energy for a conversation that should involve the federal government, state governments, city governments, civil society actors, academia, on how can we do better when it comes to immigrant integration. And it's not about helping per se, it's about maximizing what immigrants are already doing for the country, which is in the vast majority of cases, incredibly positive for the well-being of all. So those are some of the considerations that I believe we need to keep in mind as we move forward. And hopefully the legal system in our country can help us get to solutions. You know, Ivan referenced earlier that finding a way of bringing about an injunction so that this type of events stop is something that we cannot give you a date, you know, when may that come into place, but we are confident. I mean, that we have everything that we got to actually make a good case and hopefully get to that type of resolution sooner rather than later.
Thanks so much for that, Oscar. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Marian, for all the incredible and heroic work that we're doing. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, if you have additional press requests or coverage needs, please feel free to reach out to me directly. We'll also be following up with registrants and sending through copies of the video recording of this call. And again, thank you. We really appreciate your ongoing reporting on these issues at this time. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have additional coverage needs. Take care, everybody.